Hi, my name is Professor Author Charles Mwewa. I'm the author of this book, Zambia Struggles of My People. In the last segment, the last episode, I recapped the activism of the Mwenzo Mission, a Meso Association that had become the Northern Rhodesia Native Association, and then it went on to spread its influence across the nation, which led to the 1945 Britain spearheading its own mission to try to even work harder to try to accommodate the interest of the Africans in that part of the world. At that time, by 1945, the governor in Northern Rhodesia then was John Alexander Mabin, and he had issues. For instance, Malcolm MacDonald had to write him a letter because the British government was thinking of appointing information officers so that they could be garnering information about the natives. Now, this was not new in British governance system. They tried various methods of putting the black people at bay, even taking out most of their rights. They even coined or came from Lord Lugard, who at that time had been the commissioner in Nigeria and had done really very well. So when he went back to went back to England at his retirement, he put his experiences in a book. That book became the basis for indirect rule, because he had ruled most of West Africa and the part of Central Africa as a commissioner and traveled a lot and met these people. He brought to the British people the idea that Africans cannot be ruled directly because they have started to realize their rights to their land. The best way is to hoodwink them further, give them the idea that they are being ruled by their own chiefs, but actually their chiefs are subservient to us. That's how they came up with the idea of indirect rule. So by 1962, indirect rule was very effective in bringing to light the benefits of the British government in these areas. So I also emphasize in my last talk that we need to not forget the activities of guys and people like Donald Swale. Their thoughts were instrumental. Now let's see those who took their baton, who took their thoughts seriously. I'll name about 6 people, 6 of those. They became very instrumental. They had grown. They were children when Siwale, David Kaunda, Kanonso, and others were agitating through a lot of talk, a lot of ideation. They were children. They had grown now. They were now young men. So these young men now had to come and take over from the theorizing of their fathers and try to translate them into real independence for a country. One of them is Dauti Yamba. Dauti Yamba, Godwin Mbekosita Lewanika. We met Godwin Mbekosita Lewanika in 1940, 46, 48. Then Harry Mwangankumbula. Harry Mwangankumbula, Mainza Matthew Chona. Mainza Matthew Chona, Simon Mwansa Kapwepwe, and Kenneth David Kaunda. These were children in some of them were not even born in 1912. By 1924, when the government of England took over the running of Northern Rhodesia, some of them, like Kaunda, that's when they were born. His father was already an agitator in Malawi. Then these 6, they are particularly important because they grew up with agitating fathers or parents or situations. They had already been following the politics as they developed. They had already had a theory of an independent country can look like. They couldn't have gone to England or otherwise, but they had a view of their fathers, the Kanonsos, the David Kaundas, and the others. But then these wanted to translate what their fathers, their immediate father. David Kaunda was the immediate father of Kenneth David Kaunda. So they wanted not to let them down. Now, at some point, we call the first crop, the 1912, 1914, 1918, as the fathers of Zambia. We may now call them the grandfathers of Zambia, because these 6 became what now we can call the fathers of Zambia. Now, they were all men. It doesn't mean that they didn't have a lot of help from women. But in those days, it's not like in our days when we recognize the rights of women. But in those days, it was mostly men. Now, in 1956, remember, this is now during the Federation. The Federation is hammering the blacks very cruelly. But at the same time, the rights of the blacks are being recognized by the blacks themselves. They have started to exert themselves as a people. So the ANC, remember, the ANC was formed by 1948. It was still existing by 1957. Kapwepwe became the treasurer of the Lusaka-based branch in 1956. 2 years after that, there was a rift. Kumbula broke away from ANC, and the leadership started to wallow itself. And about thousands of Africans started to say they need a vote. So there is potentially the breakaway from ANC, which was at that time the major political party in Zambia. In 1958, Kapwepwe, Kaunda, Sikota Wina, and a few others also broke away from the Lusaka-based ANC, and they formed their own organization called the Zambian African National Congress, ZANC. They simply added Z to that ANC. It became ZANC. And the ZANC, which included mostly Kapwepwe, because remember, Kapwepwe was more agitative at that time. And he asked some of his friends like Kaunda and Sikota Wina. They came up together with ZANC. Now, what was this? In 1959, ZANC was declared illegal. Remember, Britain had a concern all the time, and the Federation had given its masterminds like Welensky and others so much power over African affairs. And at that time, any agitation for rights could be labeled as libel or even treason. So these agitators now in the 1950s had a huge stroll to occupy, and the big foot to fit into the British shoe. So they became some sort of weapons of politicization by the white European federal government. So those ZANC nationalists were not jailed, because a lot of them were jailed. So fortunately, Mainza Chona was one of the few of those agitators who was not in prison. Kenneth Kaunda was in prison at this time. But remember, Kenneth Kaunda was also one of the founders of ZANC. But he's no longer free. He so rest in peace. Mainza Matthew Chona, took over the ZANC that has sunk and reorganized it and gave it a new name, United National Party, UNP. So UNP. Now, there are fundamental conception of how they change these names, because a name that has been banned cannot be used. The name was later changed to the United National Independence Party, or UNIP, in the same year, 1959. A year after that, 1960, Kenneth Kaunda was released from prison. Mainza Chona willingly stepped down as the president of UNIP and handed over the presidency to Kenneth Kaunda. In the next segment, I'll build on that, and we'll see how these men, especially under Kenneth Kaunda, started to put a new imprint towards a nation would go today, Zambia. Thank you.